This introduces this idea of a phased approach, draws from some of the suggestions made during the August community meetings, and carries over some of the concepts from some of the other options. This was sort of the coalescing of a number of different factors and features. So first and foremost, the idea was that we would enhance operation and maintenance in our lots and in our garages, start adopting and really implementing these ideas that we've been talking about lately about clean and safe. We'd start doing this in 2025. We would introduce higher rates in the lots and in the garages in 2025 to try to offset some of those expenses. But notice we would not introduce any on-street parking management in 2025. We would not introduce parking meters in downtown until 2026. We would also make no changes in Delano, so we would essentially sort of carve off Delano from the system. Parking management in Delano would then be reevaluated after the hub opening. And then we would look at on-street and lot parking in Old Town as it remains today, and then introduce one of those options that we talked about a little bit for cost recovery. So here's kind of an idea of the geography. Obviously, the geography doesn't necessarily change so much with the exception of, yes, we would remove everything west of the river. For the remaining property east of the river, all of the hours of operation remain the same. Our initial model maintained the same rate structure, right? 75 cents an hour. But remember, there's nothing on street anymore in 2025, so that's only 75 cents an hour in parking lots and structures. $5 in parking lots, $10 in parking structures. I highlight those because we're going to come back to that in just a second. So here's your exceptions. We wanted to reinforce this idea, right? It's not really an exception because it's not part of the system anymore, but just to reinforce, Delano is not part of the system. It's an exception. It's not bound by the same hours and rates and all that kind of stuff. The Old Town, that's a carryover from option C, right? That Old Town will not have parking meters or time limits. Simply a cost recovery model for O&M. All the same accessible, loading, so on and so forth. So our first go at this produced sort of the following analysis. We made adjustments to the number of spaces. We pulled Delano out and the number of spaces in Delano. And based on our revenue projections, you see the O&M increase. Remember, we're enhancing clean and safe, so we're having to hire more people to go out there and try to advance a more clean and safe environment, which includes additional security measures. We will have some of a capital investment, meters, not necessarily meter heads, but the kiosks in lots and structures, right? So there will be a little bit of a capital investment. Revenues over expenses, this operates at about a negative $1.2 million. So the other thing that this option introduces, if we're losing $1.2 million in the first year, is there a scenario, because again, we're going to add meters in 2026, right? Is there a scenario in which we can recover that loss in 2025? As you can see, this got really, really complicated really, really fast. We introduced, okay, our revenue projections for 25, our revenue projections for 26 after we add meters on street, revenue projections for 2027. We also had to look at forecasting our net gain and loss in 25, our fund balance in 2025, net gain loss, revenues over expenses in 26, how that was going to impact. So if you look at this last column down here at the very bottom, you'll see after about 3 years, we function at about a $4 million net negative. Probably not a good business model. So we said, okay, well, is there any scenario in which maybe we can, let's just, for a moment, let's throw off the idea that we have to be bound by this 75 cents and this $5. Is there a rate structure that could get us to a net positive option E? We kind of stopped here because these are some pretty high rates for an introductory system. But we went back to the system and said, okay, well, what if we charged $3 an hour? And what if you charged $18 for a daily rate on lots and $22 on a structure? Let's see what that does to the model. And it still doesn't pencil out. The revenues over expenses year over year in option E still doesn't pencil out, right? Still net negative. Of all the options, B, C, D, and E, none of the options are net positive. The only net positive option is option A. Option E, advantages and disadvantages. We did recognize that while it did increase the likelihood of recovering some costs associated with O&M, one of the advantages to option E, again, even though it operates at a negative, right, is that we do start introducing this safety and security in public lot. We would theoretically ramp up security, ramp up efforts to clean on top of a response to the $12 to $18 million in deferred maintenance. However, the disadvantages doesn't recover costs associated with O&M. It's not effective at managing parking. It's hard to expand even with predetermined goals. Does not contribute to capital needs. Non-compliance requires lawsuits, and it's an inequitable parking environment resulting in unintended consequences.